it has to learn precisely in those activities in which it does not have the comparative advantage. That is, information and communication technologies. In order to do that, you need also to distort the signals, because the stone producer in the caves will find more convenient to produce a stone. So if you don't distort also one way or another the signal that the private actor face, they will say, sorry, it'd be nice, but I make my money on stone and not on microprocessors. Policies intervene on selection mechanisms. Selection mechanism including, of course, competition policies. There is a tricky issue there between on carrot and stick again, that you want to offer early on an environment in which rent seeking is not so easy. And this was one of the major weaknesses of your import substitution period, that there were basically no provision to build also a selective environment. And so it was easy to build a lot of niches of behind the curtain of protection, a lot of niches of inefficient monopolistic rent seeking. And this goes back to the political economy that Minister Lorenzo was talking about. Politics informs the pattern of distribution of information across agents, their links, the way firms access the labor market, the relationship between banks and the industrial system. In policies and institution building actually shape the very political economy of the industrialization context. And in different ways. American capitalism is very different from German capitalism, that is somewhat different from Japanese capitalism. And those that thought that you had only one best way and was the Anglo-Saxon way, well, they got their face against the world right now. Now, given these are in a sense all the levers, the ways and the buttons that public policy can and should affect. Now, how? What are there messages that we can distill out of the variegated experiences of successful industrialization? Are there some invariances that can become useful also for today's policy making? Well, two general principles are the following. One is what my friend Eric Reinhardt calls the emulation principle. Emulation principle is what I was saying before. If you are a Stone Age economy, you better emulate the information society economy, irrespective of anything, irrespective of any comparative advantage, simply because there are technologies that are absolutely generic and enter into the capabilities of doing basically everything. It's like electricity. Electricity, no matter whether you had a comparative advantage or not, electricity entered everywhere, and you need to master electricity. Nowadays, you need to master information and telecommunication and computing technologies, because these are generic technologies that are the basis of very pervasive technological paradigms. Second, there is a profound complementarity between technological learning and the development of production capacity. To put it another way, you don't learn offline. And I'm very skeptical of my many friends that say, but now with a more developed market for patents, for technologies in general, you can buy from other off the shelf. No. Technology continues to be, to a large extent, tacit and associated with the very activity of doing things. The example that I make to my student is, when I talk about tacitness of knowledge, I say, look, driving a bicycle is a very tacit activity. It is true that you can describe the riding of a bicycle with a complicated set of unstable differential equations. But I don't know anyone that has ever learned how to ride a bicycle by solving the system of differential equations. Not even those that turned out to be mathematicians later on. You learn by trying to ride a bicycle. And by the same token, you learn a technology by using it and by making it. There is not so much on the blueprint, that is. You need to nurture infant industry, and you need also to distort, as I was saying before, market signal in order to foster the emergence of technologically and organizationally competent firms. It is a bit more difficult under the current WTO regime, but it's not impossible. I mean, you need, essentially, one needs, first of all, the commitment and the view that markets are very useful objects, very useful processes that are there to be used, not to be worshipped. We were talking with the Minister before, and I was putting forward half-jokingly my conjecture that other things being equal, the rate of growth of any country is inversely correlated to the number of ministers and top administrators that got a PhD in the US. And because there you learn to worship the market. Incidentally, you learn to worship the market if you are a foreigner. The market Talibanism is an export commodity. The Americans are much more pragmatic at home, and they pursue a wide set of industrial policies. Simply, they don't call them industrial policy. But when we send our kids there to study, they actually believe what the Americans tell them. And then they come home and they do all the disaster that they do. I think that catching up countries have not learned enough cynicism and technicalities to explicitly use all the loopholes, exceptions involved in WTO, and we shall see in a minute in TRIPS agreement. That allow, I think, much more maneuver than it has actually been exploited, also because, for three reasons. One are, as I was saying, the minister or the director general that has got a PhD in Chicago and is a believer. Second is might not be a believer, is corrupt. Third is incompetent. Or any convex combination of the above. This has been a major obstacle in having, for example, trade policies in an international regime in which trade policies are objectively discouraged and often prohibited. into this world, of course, a fundamental prescription is avoid bilateral agreements. Bilateral agreements are evil. The bilateral agreements are the immediate concession of some trade opening on the side of the developed country, essentially the US and sometimes Europe, in exchange of a lot of tightening up of the possibilities of imitation, especially on the knowledge side. We shall come to TRIPS in a second. Some bilateral agreements include the provision that one should never use the exceptions involved in the TRIPS agreement and not even buy from countries that use them. So, in fact, I mean, imagine the Colombian Minister of Finance goes to Washington, say, you have now the preferred clause, preferred country agreement in textile, but you have got to give up the possibility of not only doing your version of the generic against whatever disease, say AIDS, but you engage yourself in not buying from Brazil if Brazil does it. Minister of Finance says, who cares? I mean, this is so much down the road. I take home the textile deal, and that is it. And by doing that collectively, one closes the little windows of imitation still allowed in the TRIP deals. An interesting example that I think illustrates the Jordan agreement. In the Jordan agreement, there are this type of provision. In Jordan, there are 3 pharmaceutical firms that are not bad. One, I think, is quoted also, is floated on the London market. And they do a lot of inventing around. They use the gaps in the international and property right negotiation. Final bilateral agreement with the US, game over, they cannot do that any longer. In exchange for what? In exchange of a special tariff applied to the delocalized production in Jordan of Victoria's Secret knickers. So it is Victoria's Secret against the possibility of doing drug research, okay? And this is the structure, the typical structure of the deals. Well, the Minister was mentioning it, and I think it's fundamental. All that involves dirt, all I've said up till now, that involves a lot of dirty micromanagement, and also a lot of possible grease, a lot of possible resources that you transfer to the would-be innovators. Would-be possible innovators, might or might not be. Then you need to have credible commitments to take away the rents, and credible commitment to the fact that these rents are temporary. Think of the 2 examples. One that is could be nearer the case of Brazil, and the other nearer the case of a smaller country like Uruguay. Japan. Japan early on told these firms, well, you are going to be protected against American multinationals, but A, you have got to fiercely compete with each other on the domestic market, and 2, you have got to get the Americans on their market. So the protection did not result in any ability of rent seeking. And in fact, a little incidental but fundamental one, lifetime employment was a favoring factor. Because if you have got a sticky workforce and the productivity grows fast, you need to find somewhere where to sell these things. And where to sell these things were the foreign markets. So in fact, a very rigid labor market was a fundamental engine of export expansion. Korea did not have an internal market. So what do they say? Because they were much smaller. What do they say? Did they say to the domestic firm? Look, I'll give you the dollar to buy machines, etc., abroad, but you have got to bring back the dollars in terms of export. If you don't bring them the dollar in terms of export, sorry, you're not going to have it in the next round. This is, again, another way of washing away the rents and forcing the firms to operate on the international market. More generally, you see, very successful countries had pro-developmental coalition. This is at the core of the political economy. And this coalition were pro-industrial coalition that when there was something to transfer to the industrial side was transferred. When there was nothing, like in Korea, nothing was transferred, but the focus was on the accumulation of resources in the most dynamic part of the economy. Latin America, with the partial exception of Brazil, there's been a secular problem of anti-developmental coalition. Think of Argentina. I think how the links between agrarian interest and liberal pro-English ideology, all the way up till now with the fight on the export tax of Cristina. There is a crucial political issue there, of issue of building hegemonic coalition, Gramsci would have said. Hegemonic coalition, pro-developmental or non-pro-developmental. IPR. All historical experiences have occurred, experience of industrialization, have occurred under condition of weak or non-existence intellectual property right. When you had them, they generally were highly discriminatory toward foreigner. For example, in the US, for the first 50 years of the history of the US, only national could patent. Later on, you allowed also non-national to patent, but they had to patent more or less at the same time as they patented at home, and the cost of patenting was around 10 times the cost of an American for a Brit, or 17 times the cost of an American for a non-Brit. Japan and Germany that introduced petty or utility patents to precisely protect the minor innovation of the local innovator, by the same time discouraging the entry of the foreigner. Many patent legislation in the 19th and 20th century had the clause that if you did not produce here, your patent decays. Interestingly, in 1907, I think, also England introduces that clause when they start being fearful of the German in chemicals. At that point, they introduced the clause saying, dear German, you need to produce here, otherwise your patent is null and void. Now we live in a very different world, in which, another example, Switzerland, the land of drug companies, introduced patenting on drugs in 1978, and so did Italy. Now it's very different because you have got a unified international regime with a very aggressive enforcement by the American especially and also the European multinational. Is it good for development? In my view, it is either irrelevant or harmful. In many technologies, irrelevant. In some, it's positively harmful. And I'd say that the current regime is harmful also for the rate of innovation in developed countries. Essentially, this is the actual regime, let me be totally blunt, is a huge rent-seeking machinery for big pharmaceutical company, Microsoft and Hollywood. And that is it. A major rent-seeking engine in that respect. Maybe one can get around some of the TRIPS strongest TRIPS clauses. I think that one will have to reform it, and the reform will be good also for developed countries. The current regime is a mess. Is a mess in which we were talking before. The cost of litigation in the US, that is what goes to lawyers, is 1/3 of the entire R&D expenditure of US firms. That is, the American firms spend more for lawyers, for patent lawyers, than the entire R&D budget of Germany. The same, as much as the R&D budget of Germany. It's a shame, it's a total shame. The end result is that the number of new chemical entities that big pharmaceutical companies are accepted by the Food and Drug Administration are between 10 and 25 per year. That is near zero. So. Another prescription that comes out of the entire history of avoid the natural resource curse. No country in the long term has become industrialized simply by having and selling natural resources. Well, that does not mean that it is bad to have natural resources. If you use the income well, the US have been, the industrialization of the US have been very much natural resource intensive. But they build a vertically integrated industry all around it, ranging from the mining machinery to the oil refining to the car industry that was favored by the availability of oil. So this is not saying pray to be, I don't know, Burkina Faso, no. But at the same time, the natural resource alone produce corruption, concentration of wealth, does not induce any capability to accumulation in the mining country, especially around mines. But to some extent, also, if one is not careful also about agricultural product, if one does not move the filière, the cluster down, also in terms of processing, in terms of the things that we saw yesterday, pharmaceutical inputs for the animals, and industrialize the activity and build the knowledge-intensive activities linked with the agriculture process itself. I'm almost there. You need, and all Latin America witnessed the tragedy, a consistency between industrial policy of the kind that I've been talking about before and macro policies. I mean, if you have a policy type Martinez de Oza in Argentina a few decades ago, no matter what your willingness to do industrial policy, they did not have it. But even if they had it, you could not have any reasonable industrial policy. You need expansionary and even better redistributive macro policies in order to sustain the activities of knowledge accumulation that I was mentioning before. The way I see it, this consistency has been more or less achieved in many South American countries after getting over the hangover of with the Washington Consensus, etc. There is still, if I understand well, a problem related to the relation between monetary policy, finance, and the real economy. That originated with the destabilization policies early on, and of course is a setup that is supported by the financial establishment. If you have in a place like Brazil a discount rate of the central bank of, now it went down I think to 11, and you have a real interest rate of 7, 6, while the nominal rate on the major Western market is basically 0, and the real is below 0, that what do? You simply have liquidity coming from first world country to Brazil, appreciation of the real, and on the internal side, that interest rate goes to financial institutions that own the public debt that has to yield at least the 11 point whatever percent, and generally does more. Brazil has the fortune of having BNDES, that is the development bank that intermediates the industry. But many other countries, Argentina does not have the BNDES. One there has to reintermediate the economy, but the reintermediation of the economy has to do again with the very delicate political economy issue that is the relationship between finance and the political establishment. This on the ground of, say, of the existing ensemble of rules, of international rules. Do we want to stick to them? I'm not sure. I think that, well, I've already mentioned IPR, intellectual property rights, several times, but more generally, are we sure that we want to stick to the current liberalization, international liberalization, the current globalized regime? Among several imbalances of the current globalized regime, let me just point out at one. In this world, middle income, middle capabilities countries, say ranging from Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, are caught between two hard stones because they are not yet there in terms of frontier technology. But they have China on the other side that is catching up very quickly, starting from wages that are very low. So Uruguay, Brazil, I was told by some African economists, Cameroon is a high-wage country as compared to China. And you understand well why. Because the Cameroon wages are more or less the Chinese wages. You divide by productivity, and productivity is 15 times higher in China than in Cameroon, and you get a unit labor cost that is enormously higher in Cameroon than in China. Can we stand this? Can you stand as middle-income country that tend to industrialize, and also the other first world country? I would not bet 1 peso that it is the Chinese worker that is going to pay my pension in Italy. Hardly so. They don't have the pension themselves. We need to break up to some extent this regime in order to allow, I don't think single country, because a single country cannot do it, but regions like the European Union or Mercosur to have some differential protection, allowing a fast catching up reindustrialization process, I'm talking about the Mercosur, or not too much of the industrialization process in, say, Europe. This, I think, is also the only condition that guarantees the possibility, A, of more egalitarian income distribution policies. The globalization is an enormous inequality generating device, because the unbridled process would bring all the wages of the world down to the Chinese level, which is something that we don't want, right? And of course, it is a machinery that brings profit back in the terms of the differential profitabilities on the commodities produced in Guangdong instead of being produced in Milan or Paris. The delinking, I think, is the partial delinking is going to turn out as a necessary condition also for what I call what is, in my view, the only way out of the crisis for the first world, that is a sort of innovation-friendly